The air inside the great hall of the silver moon pack was thick. It wasn't just the heat from the massive stone fireplaces, it was the smell. It smelled like wet fur, old meat, and something else, the sharp, electric scent of nervous predators. In the center of this giant room sat a long wooden table. On one side sat Alpha Varric. He was a mountain of a man, with scars running down his arms and eyes that glowed a faint, scary yellow. He was the leader of the most dangerous werewolf pack in the territory. Around him, dozens of high-ranking wolves stood in the shadows. They were leaning against the walls, their arms crossed, watching the visitor with hungry eyes. On the other side of the table sat Ambassador Elias. Elias didn't look like a warrior. He was wearing a simple, clean suit. He looked like a high school teacher or a librarian. He sat perfectly still, holding a white ceramic cup of tea. While the wolves growled softly in the back of their throats, Elias just took a slow, calm sip. He didn't look scared. He didn't even look worried. The glass human to the wolves, Elias was a mystery. They called humans the glass people. To a werewolf, who could jump 30 feet and rip a tree out of the ground, humans seemed incredibly fragile. One accidental push could break a human's ribs. One playful scratch could leave a human bleeding for hours. The wolves felt a mix of pity and annoyance. Why did they have to sign peace treaties with these tiny, weak creatures? The only reason they didn't attack was because the human council had rules. But in this hall, the wolves felt like the bosses. "Your tea is getting cold, Ambassador," Alpha Varric said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Elias smiled. It was a small, polite smile. "It's quite all right, Varric. I'm enjoying the silence. It's rare to find a pack so well-behaved." A few wolves in the back snarled. They didn't like his tone. It sounded like he was talking to pets, not monsters. The little prince, while the adults talked about borders and hunting rights, a small ball of fur was rolling around on the floor near Elias's feet. This was Leo, the Alpha's only son. Leo was barely 5 years old in human years. He was in his off form. He had little wolf ears and a fuzzy tail, but he walked on 2 legs. He was playing with a heavy iron toy, a small statue of a stag. He was grumpy. He was teething, his gums were sore, and he was bored of all the boring adult talk. Elias looked down and noticed the boy. He didn't pull his legs away. He didn't look nervous. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, bright blue ribbon, and dropped it near the cub. Leo's eyes went wide. He grabbed the ribbon and started chewing on it. For a few minutes, everything was peaceful. The Alpha relaxed just a little bit. If the human was kind to his son, maybe the meeting wouldn't end in a fight. The snap. But then, things went wrong. Leo tried to tie the ribbon around his iron toy, but his small, clumsy fingers couldn't do it. He tried again, and again. His little growls became louder. His frustration was growing. In the world of werewolves, when you get frustrated, you bite. It's an instinct. Leo looked at the toy, then at the ribbon, and finally, he looked at the hand resting on the ambassador's knee. The wolves in the shadows saw it happening. The Alpha saw it too, but they were too far away to stop it. Leo let out a tiny, high-pitched roar. He lunged forward. His jaw opened wide, revealing needle-sharp teeth designed to tear through raw meat. Crunch. The sound was sickening. It wasn't the sound of teeth hitting cloth. It was the sound of teeth sinking deep into living skin and hitting the bone underneath. The frozen world, time stopped. The Alpha's heart skipped a beat. His face turned pale. He knew the laws. If a member of the pack, especially the Alpha's bloodline, spilled the blood of a diplomat, it was an act of war. The human council would send their cleaners. The pack would be hunted. Varric stood up so fast his chair flew backward and smashed against the wall. "Oh, no!" he screamed. Every wolf in the room bared their teeth, ready to run, ready to hide, or ready to kill the witness. They expected Elias to scream in pain. They expected him to fall off his chair, clutching his hand, crying for help. They expected blood to spray everywhere. But the scream never came. Elias didn't move. He didn't even drop his teacup. The little cub, Leo, was still hanging onto Elias's hand. His teeth were buried deep in the meat of the ambassador's thumb and palm. Bright red blood began to drip. It hit the stone floor with a steady tap. Tap, tap. The look in his eyes. The entire room was silent. You could hear the wind whistling outside the heavy doors. None of the wolves breathed. Elias slowly turned his head. He didn't look at the Alpha. He didn't look at the guards. He looked down at the little boy attached to his hand. His eyes weren't full of pain. They weren't full of fear. They were empty. It was the look a giant gives to an ant that just bit him. It was the look of someone who had seen things much, much worse than a werewolf bite. Elias didn't pull his hand away. If he had pulled, it would have ripped his skin apart. Instead, he just sat there, letting the cub bite him. "Leo," the Alpha whispered, his voice trembling. Leo, let go. Right now. The cub realized he had done something very, very bad. He looked up at Elias. He saw the ambassador's face. Usually humans smell like sweat and fear when they are hurt, but Elias didn't smell like fear. Suddenly, the cub's ears flopped down. He let go of the hand and backed away, his tail between his legs. He began to whimper. He wasn't crying because he was in trouble. He was whimpering because he felt a sudden, cold chill coming off the human. Elias looked at his hand. The bite was deep. You could see the holes where the fangs had gone in. The blood was flowing quickly now, staining his white sleeve. He took a deep breath. Then, he did something that terrified everyone in the room. He chuckled. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, dark sound that made the hair on the back of the wolves' necks stand up. He set his teacup down, perfectly steady, not a single shake, and looked directly at Alpha Varric. You know, Varric, Elias said, his voice terrifyingly calm. In my culture, we have a saying. Children should be seen and not heard. He held up his bleeding hand, showing the wound to the entire room. But I think we need a new rule for your pack. Elias continued. His voice dropped an octave, becoming cold as ice. Children should be taught what happens when they bite something. That can bite back much harder. At that moment, the shadows in the room seemed to get darker. The Alpha, a 300-pound monster of muscle and fur, felt his knees go weak. He realized, with a sudden strike of terror, that the man sitting in front of him wasn't a glass person at all. He was something else, something much more dangerous. The silence in the hall was no longer just quiet, it was heavy. It felt like the air had turned into lead. Alpha Varric stood frozen, his hand halfway extended to grab his son Leo. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wanted to yell, to apologize, to move, but his muscles refused to obey. He looked at the other wolves in the room. These were his best warriors. Men and women who had fought bears with their bare hands. They were killers. They were monsters. But right now, they didn't look like monsters. They looked like terrified puppies. One by one, the sound of knees hitting the stone floor echoed through the hall. Thump, thump. The strongest warriors, the ones who usually growled at any human who dared to walk through their forest, were now pressing their foreheads against the cold ground. They weren't just bowing. They were trying to get as small as possible. They were trying to hide from the man sitting at the table. The smell of the storm, why were they so scared? It was all in the scent. In the world of werewolves, smell is everything. It tells you if someone is lying, if they are happy, or if they are afraid. Usually, when a human gets hurt, they release a sharp, metallic scent of blood mixed with the sore, sticky smell of fear. It's a scent that makes wolves feel powerful. But as Elias's blood dripped from his hand, the air changed. The room didn't smell like a wounded human. It began to smell like a forest fire that had been burning for 1,000 years. It smelled like hot iron, ozone before a lightning strike, and ancient dust. It was a smell that shouldn't belong to a person. It was the smell of a machine that had no soul, or a god that had forgotten how to be kind. Leo, the little cub, was the closest. He had the taste of that blood in his mouth. He let out a whimper so high and sharp it sounded like glass breaking. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own tail, until he hit his father's legs. He buried his face in Varric's fur, shaking so hard his teeth rattled. The smoking wound Alpha Varric looked down at Elias's hand, and his eyes widened. He saw something that defied all the laws of nature. The bite marks, the deep holes left by Leo's fangs were not just bleeding, they were smoking. A faint, thin trail of gray vapor rose from the wound. It wasn't the steam of warm blood in a cold room. It was the smoke of something boiling. The edges of the wound weren't red and raw anymore. They were turning a strange, metallic silver color. The skin was stitching itself back together right in front of their eyes. It wasn't the messy, painful healing of a werewolf. It was precise. It was fast. It was mechanical. You aren't human, Varric whispered. His voice was cracked and weak. He felt the primitive urge to shift into his wolf form and run into the deepest part of the mountains. His instinct was screaming at him, Ryun. Elias looked at his hand, watched the smoke disappear, and then looked back at Varric. He looked bored. Oh, I am very human, Varric, Elias said. His voice was smooth like a calm ocean, but there was an edge to it that felt like a razor blade against the throat. That is the mistake your kind always makes. You think human means weak. You think because we don't have claws and fur, we are at the bottom of the food chain. The shadow in the room, Elias stood up. He didn't move fast, but every wolf in the room flinched. As he stood, the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch. It looked like the shadows weren't following the light anymore. They were following him. For a split second, Varric didn't see a man in a suit. He saw a towering figure made of smoke and fire, holding a sword that could split the moon in half. "We built cities where forests used to be," Elias said, walking slowly around the table. The clicking of his dress shoes on the stone sounded like a ticking time bomb. "We split the atom. We walked on the moon. We tamed the lightning and put it in glass bulbs to light our homes." He stopped behind a massive wolf warrior named Kyle. Kyle was the pack's beta, a giant of a wolf who weighed 250 pounds of pure muscle. Kale was currently flat on his stomach, his eyes squeezed shut, praying to be invisible. Elias placed a hand on Kale's shoulder. The wolf let out a strangled sob. He felt a heat coming from Elias's palm that felt like a hot stove. "Do you know why we signed the peace treaties, Varric?" Elias asked, his eyes locking onto the alphas. Varric couldn't speak. He just shook his head slowly. "We didn't do it because we were afraid of you," Elias said. He leaned in closer. "We did it because we were afraid of ourselves. We realized that if we kept fighting you, we would have to become monsters to win. And humans are very, very good at being monsters. If we decided to finish this war, there wouldn't be a single wolf left in the world. Not even the pups." The weight of history. The wolves felt the weight of those words. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. They remembered the stories passed down from their ancestors, stories of silver rain that fell from the sky, of fire sticks that could kill from a mile away, and of hunters who never grew tired. They had forgotten. Over decades of peace, they had started to think they were the kings of the world again. They saw the humans living in their soft houses, buying their food from stores, and looking at screens all day. They thought the humans had grown soft. They were wrong. The softness was just a mask. It was a choice. Underneath the suits, the ties, and the polite smiles, there was the same apex predator that had hunted mammoths to extinction. And now, thanks to a little cub's mistake, the mask had slipped. The alpha's choice. Varric realized he had to do something. If he didn't fix this, his entire pack was in danger. Not from an army, but from the man standing in his hall. He forced himself to move. It felt like he was moving through thick mud. He stepped away from his son and sank to his knees. He lowered his head until his chin touched the floor. This was the ultimate sign of defeat. The alpha of the silver moon pack was surrendering. "Please," Varric managed to say. "He is just a child. He didn't know. I will accept any punishment. Just do not let the storm break over my people." The other wolves watched in horror and awe. Their proud leader was begging. Elias stood there for a long time. The smell of fire and iron began to fade, replaced slowly by the scent of expensive tea and old paper. The storm was being pulled back inside. The pressure in the room lifted. Elias pulled a white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the last bit of silver, red blood, from his hand. The skin was now perfectly smooth. No scar, no mark. It was like the bite had never happened. "Get up, Varric," Elias said. The coldness was gone, replaced by that same polite, boring voice from before. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to finish the trade agreement." Varric stood up, his legs shaking. He looked at Elias, really looked at him. He saw the human's eyes. They were kind again, but now Varric knew what lived behind that kindness. It was a dragon sleeping in a suit. "But," Elias added, pausing as he picked up his briefcase, "let this be a lesson. You see us as glass. You think we are easy to break. But remember, Varric, when glass breaks, it doesn't just disappear. It becomes thousands of tiny, razor-sharp pieces that will bleed you dry before you even know you've been cut." He turned and looked at the little cub, Leo, who was still hiding. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out another blue ribbon. He tossed it gently toward the boy. "Teach him well, Alpha, before someone less patient than me comes to visit." As Elias turned to walk toward the exit, the wolves parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to get within 5 feet of him. They watched him go, their hearts finally starting to slow down, but their minds changed forever. The heavy iron doors of the great hall creaked open as Ambassador Elias stepped out into the night air. Behind him, the silence was so deep it felt like the silver moon pack had stopped breathing entirely. Inside, the most feared predators of the north were still pressed against the floor, their hearts racing and their instincts shattered. Elias walked down the long stone steps of the pack's mountain fortress. He didn't look back. He didn't look like a man who had just survived a deadly encounter with a monster. He looked like a man who was thinking about what he wanted for dinner. The true nature of the quest. As Elias reached the bottom of the steps, a sleek black car was waiting for him. A young man in a dark suit opened the door. This was Marcus, Elias's assistant. Marcus looked at Ilias's hand, then at the bloody cloth the ambassador was holding. "Did they try something, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into a low, serious tone. His hand moved slightly toward the inside of his jacket. where a high-tech weapon was hidden. Elias waved him off and slid into the back seat. Just a curious child, Marcus. No need for the cleaners to be called. The Alpha knows exactly where he stands now. Marcus nodded and closed the door. As the car drove away from the werewolf territory, Elias leaned back inside. He looked at his hand again. The skin was perfectly clear. There wasn't even a pink mark where the fangs had been. This was the secret the humans kept. Centuries ago, humans realized they couldn't compete with the strength of wolves or the speed of vampires using just their natural bodies. So they changed. They didn't use magic, they used science. Elias wasn't just a diplomat, he was a product of the Iron Project. His bones were reinforced with carbon fibers, and his blood was full of microscopic machines that could fix a hole in his heart in seconds. The humans weren't glass people. They were steel people wrapped in a layer of soft skin. The aftermath in the hall, back inside the Great Hall, Alpha Varric finally found the strength to stand up. His legs felt like jelly. He looked around at his warriors. They were slowly getting up, but the fire in their eyes was gone. They looked ashamed. They looked small. Leo, the cub, was curled into a ball near the fireplace, crying softly. He had tasted that blood, and it had tasted like metal and lightning. It wasn't the blood of a living thing. It was the blood of a god that didn't care if he lived or died. Alpha, the beta, Kale whispered. What was that? That wasn't a man. I've smelled humans my whole life. That smelled like the end of the world. Varric walked over to his son and picked him up, holding him tight. That was a warning, Cal. We have spent years thinking we are the kings of these woods. We thought the humans paid us in gold and cattle because they were scared of our claws. Varric looked at the spot where Elias had been sitting. The teacup was still there. It was perfectly clean. We were wrong, Varric continued, his voice trembling. They don't pay us to keep us happy. They pay us to keep us away. They give us land so we stay in the shadows, because they know that if we ever step into their light, they will have to burn us away. Today, my son bit the hand of a man who could have leveled this mountain with a single phone call. The lesson learned: for the next few weeks, the Silver Moon Pack changed. There were no more roars in the night. No more young wolves ventured near the human villages to scare the farmers. The arrogance of the pack had vanished in a single afternoon. The Alpha called a meeting of all the nearby packs. Lords of the forest, kings of the mountains, and leaders of the wild came together. They expected Varric to talk about war or expanding their borders. Instead, Varric told them the story of the human with the iron blood. If you see a human in a suit, Varric told the gathered Alphas, do not growl, do not show your teeth, and for the love of the moon, do not bite. They are not animals like us. They are something far more patient. They have built a world of peace, but that peace is a cage. And inside that cage, they are keeping a version of themselves that we never want to meet. Some of the other Alphas laughed. They didn't believe him. They thought Varric had grown old and weak. But then, Varric showed them the video from the hall's security cameras. They watched the fragile human get bitten. They watched him sit there, unmoving, while his blood smoked like acid. They saw the look in Elias's eyes, the look of a bored predator watching a bug. The laughter stopped. One by one, the other Alphas looked away. They understood. The final message months later, a package arrived at the pack's fortress. It was a simple wooden box with no return address. Varric opened it carefully. Inside was a brand new toy for Leo, a beautiful, hand-carved stag made of solid silver. It was heavy and cold. Along with the toy was a small note written in elegant, simple English. To the young prince. The note read, "Teething is a difficult time for any young hunter. Use this instead of my hand. It is much harder to break, but much easier to swallow. Stay in your woods, little wolf. The world outside is much bigger and much hungrier than you think." It was signed with a single letter E. Leo took the silver toy and chewed on it. He didn't growl anymore. Whenever he saw the silver stag, he remembered the smell of fire and iron. He remembered the man who didn't scream. From that day on, the Silver Moon Pack became the most loyal allies the Human Council ever had. Not because they loved the humans, but because they were the only ones who truly understood the truth. Humans didn't have claws because they didn't need them. They had something much better: the ability to choose when to be kind. And as long as the humans chose kindness, the monsters could keep their forests. But if the day ever came when the humans stopped choosing to be kind, there wouldn't be enough forest in the world to hide in. Elias sat in his office in the city, miles away, looking out at the glowing lights of the human civilization. He took a sip of his tea and smiled. The peace treaty was signed. The borders were safe. The monsters were afraid. It was a good day to be a human.